Good morning and welcome to our seminar on additional smelting capacity for Chile. On behalf of Centro de Estudios del Cobre y la Minería, it is a great pleasure for me this morning to welcome you all and to also let you know that about a year ago or so, a group of members of CESCO with other professionals from the industry decided to organize around this discussion around the smelters and the smelting capacity in Chile, which we believe is a very pertinent and relevant discussion, which allows for further discussion about mining in our country after over 30 years, during which the mining strategy has mainly focused on copper production and the exporting of concentrate. That is very important as well to consider streamlined smelters in our country. And we should wonder whether this industry is feasible, economically speaking. This is why we've invited you all this morning. My name is Alejandra Wood, and I would like to thank for the sponsorship of the Ministry of Mining and also the collaboration of Voces Mineras and to media partner and Minería Chilena. I would also like to greet our audience who is watching through our portal and through the Minería Chilena site. Also, let me remind you that today we also have simultaneous interpretation available for you. You can also ask your questions through the WhatsApp number that you see right now on the screen. We will be reading those questions and we will address them in our Q&A panel session. In order to start, I'd like to turn it over now to Ivan Chukalev, who is our Undersecretary of Mining. Good morning, Ivan. Good morning, Alejandra. How are you? Good morning, all. Let me please greet all of the attendees in this seminar called Additional Smelting Capacity for Chile. Also, let me thank you for participating in this very relevant moment. The steering committee today has invited us to give some opening words about the smelters, which of course we've accepted because this very relevant topic is strictly related to the elaboration process of the first policy, the first act on mining. It's called the 2050 National Mining Policy of Chile. This is very relevant. And why is it relevant also to talk about additional smelting capacity for Chile and this new legislation piece? Well, because the designing of a mining public policy addresses the future, also addresses the action of the state around mining and views the future of the mining industry. In other words, where do we want to reach in year 2050? These questions are very important and relevant for a country which is, by essence, a mining country. This policy for 2050 is part of President Sebastián Piñera's government program, which aims at sustainable development in this industry in the short, medium, and long term, integrating different fronts, the economy, the social aspect, and the policy making to address the progress of Chile today and in the future, always seeking for an appreciation by the citizenship and the international markets of this industry, with good information and participation with regional and national reach, encompassing different stakeholders in the mining industry. And the core of this process, 150 participants were involved from the different sectors of the economy, with 3,000 people also subscribing in the different workshops in the regions during our virtual phase of this policy making process, and also in the technical conferences. The main point in the 2050 regulation includes the institutionality, mining development, citizenship participation, territory development, human capital, productivity, tax, public policy making, value chain, indigenous peoples, comprehensive labor relations, small and middle-sized mining, as well as the green mining, among other very relevant topics. Mining is an essential activity for the national economy in year 2019. It accounted for almost 10% of our national GDP and contributed with over half of the exports of our country, with fiscal revenues of around $3.7 billion, which account for 6% of our total revenues. Finally, mining will play a major role in the reactivation of the economy period. According to Cochilco's report for 2021-2023, there are 13 mining projects in the pipeline with already a proven environmental impact studies with a high probability of starting up their execution works of an investment of around $17 billion in total. The construction and operation of these investments will generate 33,000 new jobs, of which 25,000 will be active in the execution phase and the rest in the operational phase. According to the National Capital CVC, in year 2020, we should be reaching $3.8 million of production, in second place after the energy producing sector in our country. According to CESCO's research work, there's been a decline of the refining action in Chile, which means that we've been losing ground in the last 30-year period, accounting for less than 50% of our copper production in Chile. And this trend continues to be decreasing because of the progressive depletion of oxidized ores. And according to this report by CESCO, the question is, what is more convenient for Chile from the strategic perspective? Should we continue to export more copper concentrate or more refined copper in the future? This is the type of question we should ask when defining and designing a public policy. This is not an easy task or an easy question to answer, and this is really highly complex. But we should still address these very complex issues and questions with a focus on sustainable development in the future. In this context, then, this seminar is a very good contribution to the assessment of the national mining policy for 2050. Then we greet and thank all of the organizers in this initiative, and we invite them to continue to discuss about the public policy making of our country in the mining world. Thank you very much. Thank you, actually, Mr. Undersecretary, for your kind words and for participating this morning in our seminar. I would like to now offer the floor to Ivan Valenzuela, who is the General Manager of Capitales and is a director at CESCO. He's been leading this discussion on the team around the additional smelting capacity for Chile from our research center. Ivan, over to you now. Thank you very much, Alejandra. And good morning, all. Thank you for listening and thank you for joining this discussion today. I would like to clarify that today here I'm acting as director member of CESCO in this seminar. Clearly, this question mark around additional smelting capacity for Chile is relevant, and we think there are two reasons. First of all, it is possible and it is also necessary. And before addressing this question, I must say it is really hard to talk about mining without, first of all, addressing two of the main threats that humankind today is facing: global warming and the overexploitation of natural resources, in which our sector is a protagonist. So in conjunction to that, I should say that the actions of corporations, people, and governments should be assessed according to their contribution to reducing those threats.
So the key words are decoupling, less consumption on the product side, and decarbonization. Now, the initiative that we are currently moving forward with, apart from providing many local advantages, which we will see during the presentation, also, in our opinion, plays a key role in this, what we would call crusade. So the next slide refers specifically to the issue that humanity is facing. Mining is a leading player in this. So the next slide will refer to the key challenges that mining in Chile needs to face. Now, the undersecretary referred to this, mentioned how whether or not Chile will continue producing more concentrate, or what will we do over the next 20 years. And 80% of our copper production will be concentrate moving forward in 20 years. So the proposal aims to refer to the feasibility of having a mining industry that is more based on value, sustainability, and knowledge. So this trend of producing concentrate is to a certain extent related to what occurred back in the 90s and in the early 2000s. Now, during that time, as a country, we had copper producing rates that were growing at 9% roughly. That was unprecedented. And back then, we practically tripled our copper production. Now, obviously, this is something that most likely will not occur again. And this is because of environmental, social, policy, and context issues. Now, you can see on this slide how since 2016, copper production has grown marginally. Now, despite large amounts, and the future does not look so promising either. Here we have information on cathodes, concentrate, we have the smelter production. You can see how the concentrate exports grow. Now, we all know that mining has played a key role in terms of the current context of the pandemic and with regard to the country's ability to be resilient. And in the future, we are seeing that there will be an impact of what goes on in the copper industry and the overall economy. This is quite relevant and, in our opinion, more of the same, doing more of the same to try to maintain the same copper production rates we've had in the past is simply part of a utopia. So we need to think differently, think out of the box. This is an inevitable challenge, and that is to come up with more value per unit of copper produced. Now, the next slide shows how our refinery capacity, which is a key industry in the mining value chain, has been deteriorating over the last few years. And Chile has, as a result, deteriorated its market position in this realm. You can see some basic data on the next slide. For example, over the next 30 years, the smelter capacity, over the last 30 years, the smelter capacity has remained the same, rather, despite the fact that the copper concentrate production rate has tripled, more than tripled, during the same 30-year period. Now, this chart shows that practically all of the companies have reduced their capacity except for one, Alto Norte. Now, this production is also related to more worrisome variables that you can see in this slide. This refers to the cost. We can see on average that the cost of smelters has increased and is higher than overall market costs. Here you can see that there are two groups here. One group of companies with higher costs and one group with lower costs. So it's not a genetic, if you will, issue related to Chile per se, but rather it's related to the companies' ability to manage this situation. Now, the next slide refers to our hypotheses, where we say, yes, it is possible and necessary to come up with a new refinery scenario in Chile. Now, Alejandra referred to how we were often very surprised when we took a closer look at this sector has relatively stayed in the past. And some would say that this is not a very attractive sector for many companies out there. And clearly, this sector has been marginalized. It's on the fringes as well. So, our interest lies in separating all these factors and analyzing them because we believe that following this assessment, the smelter business clearly is a challenging business, but at the same time, it continues to be profitable and it is a key leverage device for mining in Chile in the future. Now, we believe it is possible to take advantage of this, leverage this market. We know that there are different pros and different points against the market, but in order to conduct this study, we came up with some key data that we needed to study. So the basic data is here. You have the production at 1.5 million tons, an investment 1.5 billion, and the copper cost is roughly 17 dollars per pound. And the return on the investment is roughly 13%. Now, the risks involved of having we know that the risk involved in the smelter and refinery business is entirely different from the mining industry per se. And the investment return rates for this area tend to be low. So for an international operator with experience in this area, seems to be quite reasonable when compared to other markets. The press has referred to at least 3 refinery initiatives around the globe. So this sector has not seen its better days. It is reviving and it is still alive and kicking. Now in India, Indonesia, and Peru, we see that there are several initiatives out there to develop and build refineries. And Chile obviously has a transport shipping advantage. This provides economic and environmental advantages. So when we say that this is a necessary investment, of course it is, but we also refer to other aspects that are key. Now, for example, it's necessary to have an environmentally sound process. It's important to bear in mind that these low emissions alternative, and it's also been calculated that shipping concentrate versus shipping cathodes does have a significant impact on global warming and the global warming as a result of the use of fossil fuels and diesel. So that is key. And then the second positive environmental impact is that this has allows to save on 71% greenhouse gases. And obviously, in terms of the energy grid in Chile, our energy grid has less of an environmental footprint, carbon footprint than the Chinese one. So this provides many contributions, technological contributions, a contribution in terms of reputation. Also, if we process here, we pay fewer penalties. There are contributions with regard to recovering sub-products, byproducts. This is something key to bear in mind around the globe. This also allows us to innovate in the metallurgical sector and to develop new materials. And perhaps what is most important here is that if we do not have modern physical facilities, we will not be able to move forward with recycling activities and further develop our country. So we know this is a key area in the upcoming years. We also know that this new horizon will boost our reputation. It's impossible to boost the mining sector reputation with the stain of environmental issues. We know that often following a survey by a key company in Latin America, we sacrificial areas, sacrificial zones have a negative impact on a country's image. So we know that. So we believe that a new modern smelter and refinery capacity will be positive. And so we want to make sure we push the boundaries in terms of the value chain. We want to have a the ability to step up to the various market players. Now, if this is all true, why have we not moved forward with this? Well, because the market hasn't worked well, one might say. And what are some of the key questions we've asked in the past? Well, if it doesn't exist, it's because it hasn't been a good idea. Well, I would think it's very difficult to actually answer the question why we have not modernized this market. I think the answer is multifold. In Chile, we have this historic love-hate relationship with natural resources, the mining industry, agricultural industry, for example. And it's a cultural issue as well that is closely tied to this, what we call the static value, something that has occurred and been seen decade after decade. Everything down the line after concentrate loses value. And this is something that we have seen repeated in many different pockets of our economy and society. Now, we know that as a result of all this, many of the mining companies simply have been discouraged and have not wanted to further become involved in this aspect of the value chain. And that has an impact on the strategic approach as a country, as well as on the market. Let me use some typical sayings. People often say, what is good for X company is good for Chile. Now, this is not always true. It's not a blanket statement that we can apply. We believe that maybe something could be very good for a specific company, that is to just ignore the whole smelter refinery aspect because of the negative aspects involved there, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good for the entire country. It's good for that company. Now, there's another aspect here that has made all of this quite difficult because the decisions involved call for a great deal of coordination among several stakeholders from different industry sectors. So there's a high entry cost, there's entry barriers, and we see that this industry is an appendage, if you will, of the overall mining industry where the concentrate comes from, correct? So in the end, that means that refineries, smelters are a secondary business, not a primary business. Now, just some interesting information. There was a Cisco study that showed that most of the investments made by refineries in the last 30 years corresponded directly to environmental mitigations and not to strategic business market related aspects. That is, trying to find, boost their market share. So in keeping with all of that, we believe that we have not seen this market grow, not because it's not a good business, but because there are several different pieces that we need to fit into the puzzle as a country. Now, Chile does have the technical, reputational, commercial foundation to be a profitable player in this market. And this should be easy to do. The integrated smelter concentrate, the integrated smelter approach has a different way of addressing the business. We know that the commercial administrative aspects are more sophisticated and comprehensive. The area of subproducts, byproducts, recycling, scrap metal, those are all benefits therein. So let's talk about the next steps. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next, next. There we go. Let's, as I mentioned earlier, we are starting from an interesting point. We must involve many stakeholders at different decision-making layers. Political will is essential. Political willingness for us to show that the country can do this, and two, to bring about the necessary policies to ensure that this occurs. So this is a country level issue, a state issue. This goes above and beyond the 4-year administration. And to be very specific, we need to look towards 2027 and ensure that this investment is materialized and operational by then. We believe this is essential. We also know that some of the smelters in existence today may either have to close down because of environmental reasons or cost-related reasons. So we know that if some of those are going to shut down, we will have to come up with a new capacity that needs to be operational by 2027. Those of us involved here know that the investment requirements are lengthy, and the permits involved take quite a long time to secure as well. So if we are to move along this path, we need to get going ASAP. So what are the key aspects? Environmental regulations, or rather environmental permits, are essential. We also know that I'm sure there will be operators with operational excellence as one of their key attributes. Environmental permits, as we know, are essential, and we know what this entails in our country, in the mining industry, and these require early involvement of the communities in this process so that the permits will be authorized and passed accordingly. So if we have to wait another 10 years to secure the environmental permit, we know that we will lose out on this opportunity. So let me wrap up with this final slide, which is merely illustrative, and it shows a bit about the roadmap. This is a typical roadmap that first shows the absolute necessity for there to be a good governance system. That is first and foremost. You need to have a clear mandate. Secondly, it's necessary to set up a variety of different technical committees to assess the investment aspects and other aspects. And then I would like to also point out that all of this wraps up with the beginning of a bidding process, a tender, public tender for the interested parties. Now, no one has said that this needs to be funded by state-owned companies. We believe that it is reasonable to believe that there will be other parties interested in taking part of this. So we believe that it is necessary to do this for the mining cycle in Chile, and so that Chile will be able to meet market needs in terms of traceability, recycling, and other aspects. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Iván.
Let me now invite Ben Jones and Eric Heimlich, both from the CRU consulting company. They will talk about the main strategies and the elements to consider in the smelting industry. They will also talk about the hurdles in developing this industry locally. Welcome, Ben. Welcome, Eric. And thank you for joining us as well.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, Eric. So I think introductions have already been made. I know a number of you around the virtual room this morning, as I'm sure does Eric. I'm going to speak in English, and I'm hoping that Eric is going to follow suit so that I can understand him. So apologies to everyone for my lack of fluent Spanish. I hope you'll be patient with me. I will speak slowly, and if you have any clarifications for me, then please do not hesitate to raise your hand or interject. Okay, so do we have slides on the screen? Excellent. So if we could just skip on to the first substantive slide, which I believe is numbered 5. So the context, next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with our business, CRU is a market intelligence and market advisory specialist in the mining and metals industries. We are a team of around 300 experts. Many of you will know, I'm sure, are headquartered in London with an office in Santiago and in a number of other key markets for the mining and metals industries, not least in China. So I think the context for today's conversation has been very well established by the previous speakers. So I will not dwell very long on the point. I guess the focus of our presentation here is to try and provide a strategic frame of reference for this discussion. We understand that there is an appetite for developing the downstream and for moving away from a marketing and investment strategy based purely on the export of concentrates. Clearly, it's a very complex decision that needs to be made, and one that needs a very robust business case, not just in terms of any project fundamentals, but also reflecting the strategic importance of the copper industry to the Chilean economy and to the fiscal revenues. Also, a business case that takes account of the broader implications of such an industrial strategy for the economy. And so we're going to discuss and present an outline framework for thinking through some of these questions and to try and enhance the rigor with which one could seek to make this business case. So next slide, please. So I guess an immediate comment is that Chile is by no means the only country which is seeking to expand its downstream capacity and to build the value add from the industry in so doing. Countries are taking a wide variety of policy interventions in order to support these strategic interventions, and those which are adopted must be suitable to the context and the political and policy appetite of the government of the day. And we know very well that in the case of Indonesia, for example, a very well-known example, some of these approaches are very innovative and very heavily interventionist. So we know that they have deployed export bans on primary and unprocessed ores in a number of contexts, not least nickel, to quite significant effect. And I'm certainly not advocating for such an interventionist approach in the political context of Chile, but it's important to recognize that these are goals and policies that are being explored across the world, and it is probably in your interest to take close account of some of these efforts because it is your competition. And there are some important lessons to be derived, which we will return to shortly. Next slide, please. So I guess the obvious point here to make is that the distribution of value add differs quite widely according to the mineral value chain that one is attempting to intervene in. And so copper rather differs from some of the other chains, not least nickel and aluminium, in the sense that the locus of value is heavily concentrated in the upstream. And this is something we know, but it's important context, right? Because it really does define the goal and the size of the prize. So by our assessment, roughly 90% or more of the value is currently centered in the mining stage. So it's an important thing to recognize, which is, we know that you have a competitive advantage in this space. So how big is the prize, and how is this distribution of economic value likely to change over time? So I'm going to pass you now to Eric, who's going to provide some commentary on our perspectives in terms of how we think that value is likely to evolve over time and what the key drivers and assumptions are behind those views. Eric.
Thank you, Ben, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for the invitation to join this seminar. Can you go to the next slide, please? The idea of this slide is to give you a bit of context of market conditions that are obviously very important when you're looking at a business such as smelting and refining, copper smelting and refining. And as you are probably aware, we are probably in a moment in time which is very difficult for smelters worldwide. After several years of a market with growing smelting capacity in China, we are in a situation where there is basically overcapacity. And the chart on the left-hand side basically shows that we have seen several years where there aren't enough concentrates to fill all that new capacity that has emerged in China. And as a consequence, we are seeing, the price that is relevant for smelters going down and down systematically for several years. It doesn't mean that is going to last indefinitely, but it's important to be aware that it's a complex situation for smelters today. We are seeing some smelters being closed, some smelters, facing very serious financial stress. Some examples are, for example, Paranapanema in Brazil, the only smelter, copper smelter in Brazil, is under a lot of pressure. It's not just because of market conditions. There are other things involved. It's an integrated smelter that has also wire and cable capacity. And you have the issues in North America, where you have seen over the decades a shrinking industry, a shrinking copper smelting and refining industry. And now we have one smelter owned by Asarco that is not operating, and people have serious doubt about its future. But as I said, it's not all bad news for the smelting industry. We think that probably we are going to enter a period of a more balanced market, and you can see that we expect the market to respond to that in the future and see a recovery in what I said is the main price, the main revenue source for smelter, which is the TCRC, the treatment and refining charges. Is what the smelter charges the miner for processing the concentrates and turning that into copper cathode. It's not the only source of revenue, and that's very important when you are trying to assess the market, not just what is happening today, but what is going to happen when you start your project. And the other important revenue streams for a smelter are obviously sulfuric acid, which is a very complex market. It really has some local peculiarities that you have to be aware of. Ideally, you need to have some local demand for your sulfuric acid, etc. Another source of revenue is the copper. Smelters usually will be able to get some free metal, some copper that is basically they can sell on, and they earn some money from the copper. It's not their main source of revenue, but it's an important one. And obviously, any precious metals that they can recover can be part of their revenues as well. So, as I said, there is some hope in terms of that the market will be slightly more favorable to the smelting industry. but the threats are still there, and the threats are basically derived from what Ivan said in his presentation before, the very quick pace at which the Chinese industry has been developing, with some people believing that that has kept the market, with overcapacity for many years, and that could happen again in the future. The next slide, please. So what is important to understand, I think, and it's related to what I have been saying, is that each of these markets across the copper value chain are very different, and the success factors vary a lot. Obviously, mining depends a lot on the quality of your resources, and Chile, from that point of view, is a privileged country, with some of the largest and most accessible in some ways resources, and a very efficient and developed mining industry. The smelting industry is very different. Margins, as you know, are a lot thinner than in the case of the mining industry. And so what are the success factors? What can make a project successful? First of all, scale is very important. We are seeing that smaller smelters are struggling in general terms all across the world. Older technology as well is doing worse than newer technology. Ivan also mentioned another important aspect that can assure success for a smelter project, which is access to the right blend of concentrates. That means being close, for example, to operating mines, which is the case here in Chile. Sometimes there is another source of revenue that I didn't mention, which is the processing of complex concentrates, where smelters with the ability to process those complex concentrates with some content of arsenic, for example, can earn a bit more money based on that. And they have to be very efficiently run, because, as I said, the margins are very small, and so if they are not operated at a very efficient level, the chances of success are much smaller. And finally, related to their operating costs, obviously the two main factors behind costs are power and labor costs. And so once again, from that perspective, and I think Ivan also mentioned this, affordable power and clean power is an important factor behind a project such as this. And labor, of course, is one of the advantages that the Chinese have had over time, and is one of the the competitive factors behind a smelter. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the other factor, when we are talking about the project, I already showed you what the level of TCRC is the main price for smelters, but you also have to build that new project, and you have to have a return on investment. And so it's very important to understand how big an expenditure, a CapEx expenditure, you're going to be facing if building these projects. As we said, one of the factors for success was scale. So you want to build a reasonably sized smelter. And also depends a lot on location. It really varies a lot. And what the chart on the right-hand side shows. Not surprisingly, China is very competitive in this regard, in terms of operating costs, but also in terms of building smelters. They are competitive in building, almost any infrastructure project, and that includes smelters and refineries. As you know, Chinese technology has evolved over the recent decades, so they are using their own technology, which obviously helps when developing a smelting project. Still, they are using some of the existing, foreign technology for some of their smelters, but they have access to this new technology. And as you can see, the differences can be very significant. In projects that are being planned, as Ben mentioned, in Indonesia, they are very remote. access to capital is much more complicated, and so you will have a much harder time trying to get a return on your investment. And in fact, the companies involved there have been very pessimistic. As you know, it is basically Freeport McMoran, the owner of Grasberg, the big gold copper mine in Indonesia, that is being to some extent forced by the Indonesian government to develop that project. And they have been very open about the fact that they wouldn't develop these projects if they weren't forced by the regulations of Indonesia to develop that project, because they don't think that they can achieve returns on their investment there. So that's something to keep in mind, that you have to keep your capex numbers at a reasonable level. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to make a good business case. And finally, the final point I wanted to make before passing on to Ben is that what you can see on the left-hand side chart is where we have seen growth in recent years during the last decade. And as you can see, it has been all concentrated in one single place, which is China. More than 8 million tons of additional smelting capacity, almost nothing outside of China. There are some exceptions. Africa is a good example. And it's interesting to understand why the smelting industry is being developed there. And it is related to something that was already mentioned as well, which is the freight costs. Basically, these copper belt countries, Zambia and the DRC, are landlocked, are very far from any ports. So exporting concentrates is too expensive. And so they can benefit from processing those concentrates locally. The other factor for Zambia is the sulfuric acid market. As I said, that is something that is very relevant when you're looking at a smelter project, to understand how the local market, sulfuric market, is going to evolve. As you know, the Chilean market demand for sulfuric acid is expected to decline. So that is something to keep in mind when analyzing a smelter. And the other countries, as have most of them. In the case of India, the expansion is one country that, as you know, is where future copper demand is expected to grow. So it's not surprising that they are developing a smelting and refining industry, but it has been very slow. In fact, it grew, let's say, at the beginning of the decade, closer to the years 2000. And has faced many serious issues because of environmental concerns and things like that. So that's another important aspect to consider, the environmental standards at which these smelters will operate. One of the biggest smelters in India is basically not operating at the moment because it has been forced to close for environmental reasons. So that concludes my part of the presentation, and I would like now to ask Ben to continue with the presentation. Ben, are you there?
Hello, can you hear? I'm so sorry, I was on mute. It's the mistake of 2020, I think. Could we skip 2 slides? Yeah, great. So I guess we've started to talk, and Eric, I think, has very clearly elaborated some of the key drivers of comparative advantage at the project level. And clearly, for those tasked with building a business case, undertaking early stage feasibility and more detailed bankable feasibility analysis, this kind of analysis is fundamental to successful financing. But clearly, in a country like Chile, where the copper industry is just of such strategic importance, it is important to recognize that there is a wider sort of economic and strategic context for these kind of decisions. And specifically, they're very complicated to think about because there are such a broad range of potential spillover effects into the economy from a major smelting complex. We can think, for example, of potential and downstream enablers of further industrialization. Equally, we can think upstream all the supply chain support that such an investment can provide. And clearly, those elements of the supply chain historically and today are very important in Chile. So these are issues that cannot be discounted, and they shape the overall strategic case. Now, I would argue, and based on experience working globally, that this part of the story is often missing from the discussion, or it's held but not substantiated properly. And there are two reasons, I think, for this. So one is the effects are complex and they're difficult to measure. And the second is that those whose interest it is in telling these stories, in evaluating these effects, often have credibility issues in the eyes of policymakers because they are seen to have quite narrow interests. So squaring this circle is, I think, an important challenge as you move to the stage where you have an actionable plan, which involves support from the financing community, support from the industrial sector, and also importantly, support from policymakers. So CRU, I would argue, have got quite an important value offer in this space. Because we provide measures and analysis on an independent basis that can help break down these measurability issues and overcome some of these credibility issues by virtue of our data, by virtue of our objectivity. So I'm going to introduce you to one of these measures, and it's certainly by no means all of them, which we've termed host country cash flow. So we're here trying to capture the share of value from a project that falls to the national economy, either through the fiscus, through the government accounts, or through the supply chain as a function of the expenditures and capital investments of the asset and the incidence of those expenditures in terms of their procurement patterns locally. So I guess I haven't undertaken this in any detail for the smelting sector, but we can show you an example below in the case of a well-known copper and leaching facility in northern Chile, which many of you will, I'm sure, know well. And on the right-hand side, we have our analysis on the time path of cash flows that fall to the project developer, right? So this is the bit that goes in the business case. This is the bit that the bankers sign off on ultimately. But the key thing is on the left. So this is our measure of the value from that project that is retained to the host government, to the host country. And clearly they're very different. They're different in scale and they're different in pattern and timing. So, what is a loss-making phase to the owner, the capital investment, the 2 billion odd of capital that goes to the project, actually a significant portion of that flows to the supply chain, And so the ability to measure and communicate that value, I think, is an important part of building consensus surrounding, the case for such a mega complex. Next slide, please. So as I say, we've stopped short, of formal evaluation in this case, because I think we would need to put a lot more detail around the analysis. But, here we've tried to characterize, the expenditure shares in the refining and smelting sector respectively. So what is such an installation likely to spend its money on? And that very much reflects the key sources of comparative advantage in CapEx and OpEx that my colleagues already spoken about. But then the question is, how much of that value will be retained? So to understand the volume of jobs, the flow to the supply chain, and the extent to which policies and cooperation between the industry and the supply chain can be designed in a way to capture the most value possible. And I think we'd be very excited to help provide some advice into this space, because I think we see it as a particularly important area in this consensus building stage. So the next slide, please. So I think one of the key messages that I took from the previous section from Eric's piece is really that, you know, there's no such thing as steady state in commodity markets. It just doesn't exist, right? They're in a continual state of flux. And the important thing when you're thinking about these kind of investments that carry long-term returns is to distinguish between the cyclical nature of, for example, you know, excess build out in China at this current juncture, from the structural patterns that really affect underlying competitiveness now and over a sustained period in the future. So here I think, you know, so this kind of scenario analysis is really very much bread and butter for us. And I guess one kind of driver that falls from the white paper that was kindly shared with us in advance of this meeting, and one that we very much agree with, I think, is just the critical importance of rising valuation placed on the environmental, social, and governance standards around our materials supply chains. You know, this is according to our analysis and a recent survey that we undertook with our strategic partner Fitch, which, as many of you will know, is the leading rating agent on credit in our industries on the continent of South America. You know, among investors, among corporates, the importance of curtailing carbon emissions is really first and foremost. And I think we can see that these kind of considerations are likely to drive both demand for certifiably green product and in the relative cost of meeting those demands across jurisdictions and segments, right? So can we go to the next slide, please? So really just to expand on that comment a little bit, you know, these forcings are really going to affect the pattern of prices, cost, margin, and the distribution of investment in the industry for decades. And it is entirely plausible that Chile can be the beneficiary of these changes. So one can think narrowly about, for example, the emissions savings in freight from transporting a smelted rather than a concentrated product. Okay, fine. But there are many more things, you know, and perhaps capturing some of the very rapid rate of progress that is being made in the upstream is one opportunity. So in a recent study that CRU Consulting undertook in looking at the power procurement patterns of key Chilean miners, we can see that the carbon emissions from this sample of mines is set from power specifically is set to fall by 75% in just 5 years. So the Chilean upstream is transforming its carbon footprint, right? So there are potentially real advantages of that in a world where either we're pricing those carbon emissions, so you're going to change the relative cost of your raw material relative to some of your competing jurisdictions, but also you're going to provide, you're potentially, you know, copper's really, really challenging to certify the material through the steps. So having an integrated offer with verifiably clean product in the mined product, in a jurisdiction that is stable and well respected, such as Chile, I think is a real opportunity here. So I think the key thing here is to build a business case that takes proper account of the changes in demand and costs and market access that might arise from evolving preferences, both among investors and particularly consumers, in terms of the viability of a potential smelting asset here in Chile. So really, I think that's just an encouragement to really think that the past is not necessarily a guide to the future. Sure, we need to take proper account of all the sources of competitive advantage and build that story for the project developer. But actually, bigger picture here is that there may be some major structural trends that can affect that business case, and they need to be taken due account of. So I think we're kind of nearing the end of the presentation. If I could just surmise on the next slide, please. Great, thank you. So Eric's kind of pointed out very clearly that the current market environment for smelting capacity is tough, but there are some grounds for optimism. We've pointed out that that you need to take very close account of where value is in the chain. You're obviously very well positioned in the upstream, but there are considerations that may cause the viability of the downstream to evolve over time. And in particular, this question of carbon emissions, this question of carbon mitigation, this question of certification of materials is going to be very important in thinking about how that business case changes over time. Now, especially as we think into the long term. And I guess finally, just to reiterate the point that really I think successful consensus building requires a really clear understanding of what the broader benefits to the economy may be from such an investment. So Eric, I don't know if you've got anything to add. That's about it from me.
No, Ben, I think I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Cometí el error más común del presente año, estar con el micrófono mute. Muchas gracias, Ben y Eric,
Let us
por
thank Ben
esta...
and Eric for their interesting presentation. And I think you provided just what we needed. This was an independent perspective and the content that allows us to segue into a discussion and set this discussion in the context of the 21st century. We must leave nostalgia for the smelting and refinery business behind, because now we must look forward. We need to focus on the future of our industry, in that these trends are having a structural impact on the markets, and perhaps they're providing us with an opportunity to truly become a preferred low emissions copper supplier. So thank you to both of you. Now let us begin with our panel discussion. I would like to invite two senators of the Republic to join us. These two individuals have played a key role with regard to the Mining Commission, and I'm referring to Alejandro Garcia Huidobro, who is a political scientist from the University of Chile, and at present he is a senator of the Republic for the O'Higgins region. Good day, welcome, Senator Garcia Huidobro. I would also like to introduce you to Senator Juan Pablo Letelier. He is an economist from Georgetown University and also has a master's degree in economics and international policy from CIDE, the Center of Economic Teachings and Research in Mexico. At present, he's a senator for the O'Higgins region as well. He, at present, is the chairman of the Labor and Social Security Committee, as well as other committees. So a warm welcome to both of you. Moreover, I would like to invite Ivan Valenzuela to this discussion as well. As mentioned earlier, he is the general manager of Eco Metales and director of CESCO. We have received many questions from the public, but we don't have much time. I would like to begin with the questions that we have prepared, and this question is for both of the senators. I would like for you to just briefly and succinctly react to Ivan's presentation and CESCO's initiative. Just 2 minutes, please, so that we can move on with the rest of the questions. Let's begin with Senator Garcia Huidobro. Thank you very much, Alejandra. I would like to greet all of the panel members and thank Ivan and Sesco for providing us with the opportunity to talk about these key issues. And wow, it is so hard to make progress in our country, specifically with regard to issues that are so essential to developing the main economic activity in Chile, that is mining. So I wanted to thank you all for allowing this event to take place. I truly value this effort. And I would like to ask that at the next meeting of the Senate's Mining Commission, that we talk about an issue that has been waylaid, an issue that has been set on the back burner. For example, the FURE Commission, which was set up in 2015, and that's an issue that has been put off and constantly postponed. And it's time to sit down and make decisions to quickly go back to that issue. Otherwise, we will continue to postpone this. We will continue to postpone greater development, and not just of our mining sector, but of the entire mining cluster and the environmental services that are increasingly growing and mushrooming around this. And we see that the concentrate is being addressed abroad. So there's another issue, Alejandra. It's essential to work jointly with the various government agencies. I think when we actually submitted for the first time in history, I would have to say, a unanimously supported project to the Commission back in 2015, a project on smelters and refineries. And then we actually saw that there was a presidential committee set up under President Bachelet back then. There significant progress was made, but that was a while ago. And we have come across some challenging hurdles along the way as far as continuity is concerned. There was a great deal of agreement, generally speaking, in the mining industry, but we did not have the right coordination, articulation in terms of the meeting of minds, if you will, by the environmental authorities back then. I don't know if we would have the same issue today. I really don't know, but in any event, generally speaking, we're truly appreciative that we can have this opportunity today. It's a unprecedented, historic moment, opportunity. We need to sit down and seriously address the future of refineries and smelters in our country, high level, technologically speaking, and focus on reducing the cost as well. I think we have a cost issue that needs to be quickly focused on. So if we don't do this, we will be jeopardizing our mining industry, specifically in terms of green mining. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Garcia Huidobro. Now I would like to hear from our other senator, Senator Letelier. 2 minutes. Thank you, Alejandra. Thank you for the opportunity that Sesco has provided me to take part in such a strategically important event for the future. I would like to greet the other panel members who have also joined us today, and allow me to react to Ivan's presentation, because I think he has provided us with a very healthy, gentle push forward, because he speaks about the opportunity lying ahead, an opportunity in a country with a well-founded mining tradition and an extraordinary amount of natural resources. Given the current context, this country with these fabulous attributes is facing a very interesting environmental context, which is shaping the future as well. We need to discuss that, and there's a great deal of frustration as well, because we often ask ourselves, what gives? Why is this market that we're referring to not further developing? We are a well-renowned mining country with clear competitive advantages, specifically in the near future in terms of energy and other areas. So why don't we have the capacity, the willingness, the ability to make the right decisions so that we can ensure that our smelter and refining capacity remain intact? I think we have had many setbacks in recent years, and we are frustrated because the decision makers have not been able to have an impact and have not taken advantage of this gigantic opportunity. Now, the presentations we have seen clearly speak to an interesting Gantt chart for upcoming years. So I would have to say we need to answer the following questions. What decision-making capacity do the authorities have to revert this inertia that we've seen in recent years? We know that the state-owned mining company, Codelco, is in part responsible for this, responsible for the country to continue producing concentrates and to not waste any of our time in the value chain. We need to change that perspective. We need to overcome this hurdle, I think. Thank you, Senator Letelier. Thank you for your perspective. It's quite interesting. I would like to go back to Senator Garcia Huidobro because he referred to the work of the Senate's Mining Commission back in 2015. Why do you think that we haven't received any news on the outcome of this project? Would you say it failed? And if so, why do you think it failed? I do not like the word failed, Alejandra, because I think what we did was we started pulling away at a thread and started unraveling an opportunity. And we worked with scientists, experts in technology. It was a comprehensive project back then. And I remember we were working with Senator Isabel Allende, Alejandro Guillet, presently a senator as well, others. And we were very proud of what we did. It was unanimously supported, and then it was endorsed by the Senate. It was delivered to the presidency, and the president at that time received it quite well. And this resulted in the Fure Commission, which you also took part in, correct? Do you remember that? Now, I don't think it was a failure. I think it was a very essential starting point, but we need to recognize that we did make some mistakes. The commissions often are specialized, and I think in our case, the mistake was to not work well with the environmental authorities in office back then, and we did not have the support of the Minister of the Environment back then. We had come up with a very strong, robust proposal, and postponing the decree of the 55% of emissions and moving on to 95% emissions, that was crucial because there were certain sectors that were saying this is just unstoppable. But we need to understand that now we've invested $2.6 million roughly in, and I'm sorry to use this word, in sprucing up our smelters, hanging up some lights and banners, but that's not enough. We'll be able to meet the emissions limits, 95%, but we are going to come up short because we need to not only just meet the emissions limits, but capture and collect all the other hazardous elements that do have economic interest as well. So it wasn't a failure. I do believe we made mistakes with regard to our relations with the environmental authority. And I agree with Senator Letelier. We all need to work together, the mining industry, the producers, the authorities, everyone. We all need to reach a consensus so that we can truly make progress. Otherwise, we will once again come up against a situation that we've seen in the past. We have a project that back in 2015 was launched, and 5 years later, we're talking about the same issues, but the economic context globally has changed, so the environmental context. So we also need to understand that we will see an increasing number of problems day by day because we are exporting dirty concentrates. And that obviously will force us to revisit the situation. So it wasn't a failure, but we need to, once again, revisit it all so that we can make some necessary tweaks to address the future moving forward. Thank you very much. Those are key components worth mentioning. I would like to go back to Senator Letelier to ask him something. Chile is criticized for its value chain, and the industry also has, the refining industries seem to be polluting, contaminating. How do you think we could deal with this paradox? I think it's true that globally, and not just in Chile, mining does not have the best image. Mining is seen as a very polluting industry. You see the stacks and the emissions of many undesirable elements. And I think that is just something that has dug its heels in decades ago and has remained as such. We have ventanas, this sacrificial area that does not help this image in the least, this image that is set in stone to a certain extent. I would say that most of the population, at least in Chile and around the world as well, does not have enough knowledge of the production process that you can produce without having a negative environmental impact and without emitting negative elements. And in Chile, we do have the opportunity to smelt and refine copper with a minimal impact in terms of CO2, the lowest CO2 impact in the globe. And then we have green hydrogen as an energy source. And then we have the wealth of new technologies as well. So I think there's a problem in our ability to explain the technological innovation that we've seen. We bear a burden in this regard. And maybe I'm being too harsh, but we need to add more value to copper. And since copper was nationalized, first of all, way back when, there was this process of setting up the top mining company in the world, Codelco. And back then, the national copper culture was focused on producing concentrate. And we did not devote ourselves to the value chain. There's a lot of examples of this. I think we are one of the countries that has the highest consumption of mining machinery consumption. And how many of these parts and pieces are produced in Chile? Well, very small percentage. Perhaps, well, very less than what we could do. And I'm not even referring to other aspects of the value chain, such as smelters and refineries. So in the end, I think there has been an issue, a problem, because smelters and refineries have been closely tied to the copper producing companies, and that's been a problem. Obviously, this is a part of the value chain that is very attractive if you look at it, the hard, cold numbers from a business perspective. And the concentrate, I think we need to de-link these two realities. It's been tough, but that's what we need to do. Now, in addition to all of that, as Ivan mentioned, in Chile for quite a while now, we have had this predominant perspective of being an extractive economy, not just in mining, but in the fishing industry, in the forestry industry. So we have this deeply set in stone extractive industry approach that doesn't really add value. And I think Ivan's presentation specifically refers to how we can make that switch. We have the strategic advantage geographically, resource-wise, and copper, which is an essential commodity, is something that we can actually in Chile now produce with fewer negative emissions. So thank you so much, Senator. I would like to now pose a question to Ivan. I will start mixing in a few questions from the public. This is from Sergio Harpa, who is saying, given the high investment and low profitability, what would the benefits of a new refinery be in Chile? Others ask, is this a good business? If it's a good business, why hasn't it been developed yet?
Directo. Efectivamente, son inversiones altas, pero no mucho
In
más altas.
fact, that is a high investment to be made. We're talking about a high amount in millions of dollars, slightly minor, lower than actual mining developments, capital investments. But we see today IRRs close to 7%, 6%, 7% with a capital cost that is manageable, provided that we have a guaranteed concentrate supply, plus the participation of all of the stakeholders which are relevant, and also a good sample of highly ranked international operators in the loop. This is not trivial. I would say it's rather feasible, and it could attract investors who would be interested in investing in the long term in Chile with all of the advantages we have here in the network, including transportation and other ones such as lower carbon emissions, plus a positive impact on the carbon footprint. I definitely believe this is feasible. Second, I would say, or to the question of how come we haven't yet built, I would say there are a number of elements in this. We have several hurdles or question marks around this. Today, though, we are at a turning point, I would say, worldwide, locally as well. And it is very clear today that the world has surprised us with things that we never thought of. Who would have told that we would stay locked for so many months at home a year ago, teleworking, homeworking, as we are now? Also, when it comes to decarbonization and protection of the environment, which used to be a hippie type of motto, today is definitely the way to go. We've heard talk about the environmental policies in Chile and the reduction aim, the carbon reduction aim on it. Things used to be all scattered around, like the environment was here, carbon was there, concentrate was quite, it was addressed in a quite different way. Today, though, we have been able to integrate everything, pull everything together, or let alone the hydrogen now today is also on the picture. So basically, this is what I believe, and I include here available clean energy with a long-standing history in metallurgy. It's not that we don't know how to do this. We definitely have a past history. It's just about changing the switch, as someone said earlier, and making it more profitable. Our industry in Chile today is found in a third cost quartile, but we continue to produce mining products. We're happy that the Chinese are found in the first quartile, but we also believe we could be competitive, maybe not at the first quartile level, but it doesn't matter. We still are generating value or adding value, which Ben said. And most of that value is retained locally in Chile, which is so relevant at the time of considering a sustainable and appreciated mining industry in Chile. We know that today the mining industry is not well seen, but we need to turn this around. And we know as consumers, we need our mining, we need our copper, and as producers, we live out of copper. So any impact on our industry and the license to operate of our industry becomes a disaster in the country. We then believe that viewing this in a different way, from a different perspective, is definitely a must. Thanks, Ivan. And also, along the same lines, Mr. Harpa has another question. China has become self-sufficient in terms of cathode consumption. Also, Japan is a high consumer. Which do you think would be the potential destination market for Chilean cathodes? Well, actually, that is a very complex question to address, and we should maybe take longer in addressing that. But if Chile would have continued to grow at the rate it used to, in terms of Q concentrate rates, what would have happened? We also heard Ben Jones talk about this. He was saying that competitiveness of a smelter has to do with both the size and how long it has been in the industry, as Eric also added. But clearly, there's nothing so obvious. When it comes to China or the competitors, we're hoping that there are no other competitors. That is clear. But still, we need to face the fact that we need to compete against others, and we can't not produce because we're afraid of competing. Otherwise, we would be closing all of our smelting facilities in the country, which is the dispute in Europe at this point. And if Chile disappears from the picture, it would be great for them. This is not an easy task. I know that. We all know that. Staying around, staying in business with growing costs in the mining world, with higher restrictions to the environment, with a very hard to keep license to operate is not an easy task. And all of the efforts must drive in that direction. The analysts are saying so. We should change our mindset here and make a shift. If we're based on the fact that we won't be allowed to producing or adding more value, okay, let's just stay around surviving forever, producing concentrate, which is not the way to go, clearly. From the standpoint of the country, this would be mortgaging our future. The figures are crystal clear about this. It's not that we're just producing rod or cathodes, and that's it. It's a comprehensive picture. There's many pieces in this puzzle, and how to add value considers all of those pieces. In Australia, they produce 3 more times mining products in Chile, and they export 15 more times than Chile. We need to seek for the right product, and we need to make the right effort to stay in business and be cheap producers, reducing our costs, improving our productivity numbers. It's about competing. It's all about competition and staying in business, creating the right niches, and try to seek for a world without competition or competitors. This is impossible. We know we need to compete against others. Thanks a lot, Ivan, for that point of view. And I also have one more question for Senator Garcia Huidobro. Why a new smelter instead of just taking advantage of the already existing ones? A question from Juan. Well, for a very simple reason, because the current ones are old-fashioned and they were remodeled. It would be resuscitating the dead, because technology has evolved, it has changed. We need to streamline our technology. So Ivan is talking about the chances of a $1.5 billion smelter. 5 years ago, we didn't even know the cost of a brand new facility. We're talking about a completely new world. The technological revolution today is huge, is amazing. And furthermore, I believe that the fact of not counting on new facilities will condemn us to not staying in business. We can't just stay as a concentrator producer. As the grades are going down and impurities become part of the picture and make it harder to compete and export, we definitely need to seek for other opportunities and think about the future and think about the real possibility of really being able to stay in business with only concentrate. I think it is fundamental to have this discussion and to build a new smelter. I also agree that communications are important. We need to be able to send the right message and show our mining industry be capable of really teaching the country, first of all, the high value we have. There are regions in the country which are a lot dependent upon mining, like Antofagasta or O'Higgins regions. Of those two regions would be totally different without the mining industry present. I think we've made a big mistake as a government, at Congress as well, and the companies, the private sector as well, the institutions. All of us have made the mistake of not doing this right. We haven't really been able to do this right. And it's really easy to criticize mining today. It's a lot easier to do that than facing the challenge, and let alone the social media. The criticism sells a lot more than positive news all over the place. This is the reality that we are addressing, not just in Chile, but all across the world. So I'm sure we have a historical opportunity here today. And if we're not capable of really standing up for good solutions and a refining solution, especially, we won't be able to compete in the future markets. I so much agree with you, Ivan. If we don't add value, understanding that we're far apart, we're far away, and this is also a hurdle, we need to become even more competitive and strongly strive for demonstrating that the Chilean mining can actually go out to a greener production with green hydrogen, and using all of the opportunities we have, and using our renewable energy, such as the sun power, wind power, all those energies that the world is turning to today. The world is claiming for all of that. So I think we're facing a historical opportunity that we can't just let go. And also, let me just take the chance now to also tell you that in the bill we have today at Congress on glaciers, we're also dealing with this. We're trying to understand that we need to work on a coordinated fashion. We need to work together around water, but also we need to understand that we hear say that the mining industry is affecting glaciers. This is not at all true. It's the climate change which is melting down our glaciers, not just because of mining, but because of the increasing temperature all across the world. Then there are the communications must help us. We have to have communications on our side and be able to use them as well in the mining sector. The government as well, the state should do that too. We are so much dependent upon mining. We are leaders in mining. We're the largest producer in the world. We have the largest reserves in the world. So we need to be responsible for all we got. We must be coordinated, work in coordination, and definitely have maybe one or even more new refineries which are feasible and competitive. Thank you, dear Senator. Now over to you, a question for you, Senator Letelier. And this is the last question of the seminar. Which do you think is the role that the state should play in this discussion, in this debate, or a potential initiative?
First of all, I think the state needs to understand that this is in their national interest. Now, the opinion that this is a market, or rather an issue that will be resolved by the state or just by the market, is a mistake. This neoliberal criticism that the government is a subsidiary, in a subsidiary role, is an issue. Now, the state needs to play a role in terms of strategic decisions, obviously, and public policy needs to have an impact here. Let me provide you with some examples, because some of us actually have been working on this, and we are about to submit a bill, a project that is related to how the state should have a public policy to bring about the right conditions that were mentioned by Ivan to a certain extent. That is, how can we ensure that any investor in Chile will have the first right to access to concentrate at a market price? How can we ensure that a natural resource that's in the ground, that is provided under concession, that is exploited, will have as the first recipient of the concentrate a refinery in Chile? That's what we need to do. We need for the state to be proactive so that we will set the stage for this investment to occur. Today, more so than ever, we see that there's a greater awareness that this is something we simply cannot leave to the devices of the market. There are competitive advantages that are key that we have here. For example, producing cleaner energy, and also the copper industry will be limited. It will be facing limitations because of the environmental aspects. Therefore, shipping concentrate will be export barrier. And this concept of green copper, it's not a suggestion, it's a necessity for the future of our copper industry. That's why we need the state to view this differently. And this is not just Codelco. I'm not just referring to Codelco. I'm referring to the state setting the stage so that we have more investors. And several of us here are actually backing a bill that would allow us to set up a situation in which the first individuals eligible for receiving concentrate as a refinery should be national parties or present in Chile. So finally, I would just like to thank CESCO. CESCO has done so much for showcasing the importance of mining for the country. We know that mine sites are located high up in the mountain plateaus and in remote areas, so there's not necessarily an overall national awareness as to the importance of the mining industry. And I think this initiative, once again, serves the purpose of letting everyone remember that Chile is a mining country above all. Thank you so much, Senator Letelier. Thank you to Senator Alejandro Garcia Huidobro as well. Thank you to Eric Heimlich and Ben Jones. Thank you to the Undersecretary of Mining and Ivan Valenzuela. Thank you to all of you for joining us and holding this discussion on the future of the mining industry, specifically the foundry capacity. I wanted to thank you all for being here so that we could talk about the new foundry capacity in Chile. So we are on time. It's 11:20. It's time to convene. Thank you to all of you who have joined us from afar. We have received more than 24 questions. Unfortunately, we did not have a time to address all of these questions. However, we hope that we will have a second opportunity to meet as well. Thank you very much. We'll see you the next time around. Thank you. Thank you.
Éxito.